Imagine waking up in 2025, but not in the world you know. There's no European Union, no United Nations, no internet as we understand it. Instead, there are swastikas on official buildings in Paris, Rome, and Moscow. Every morning, loudspeakers play an anthem glorifying the Führer. The languages we speak are slowly being erased, replaced with mandatory High German education. Freedom of thought is dead. Surveillance is total. And history, our history, is forbidden. In this world, World War II didn't end in 1945 with the fall of Berlin. It ended in 1948 with the fall of Washington, D.C. The Allies were crushed. Britain surrendered. The Soviet Union collapsed. And the United States, it never dropped the bomb. Instead, it was dismembered, turned into client states, with swastika, flags flying over once free capitals. This isn't just fiction for a dystopian novel. During the early 1940s, Hitler and the Nazi High Command believed they could reshape the world permanently. They had detailed plans, blueprints for new, global cities, population control systems, even the suppression of religions and ideologies. And they came terrifyingly close, so close that a few changes in battle outcomes, a few days, a few decisions, might have rewritten all of human history. But how would that alternate world have looked? What would have happened if Hitler had won the war? And more importantly, what does that say about the fragile nature of the world we live in today? This is not just a journey into a nightmare. It's a thought experiment that forces us to confront the razor-thin line between victory and tyranny. Because to understand what might have been, we need to revisit what actually happened. Before we twist the timeline, let's rewind the clock. Let's return to the moment the world still had a chance, and examine how that chance nearly slipped away. By 1939, Adolf Hitler had already transformed Germany into a military machine fueled by propaganda, fear, and an unshakable belief in racial supremacy. When he invaded Poland that September, the world plunged into its deadliest conflict. War II had begun. And for the first 2 years, it seemed as though the Nazis were unstoppable. France collapsed in 6 weeks. Britain stood alone. The Blitz rained fire over London. Across Europe, fascism spread like wildfire. Hitler's armies tore through Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Yugoslavia. Even North Africa began to fall under the shadow of the swastika. But in 1941, the tide began to turn. Hitler invaded the Soviet Union in June, expecting a quick victory. Instead, he awoke a sleeping giant. Then came December, Pearl Harbor, and the United States entered the war. Suddenly, the Third Reich was fighting on multiple fronts against the two most powerful industrial machines on Earth. By 1944, the D-Day landings in Normandy marked the beginning of the end. The Allies pushed from the west. The Soviets closed in from the east. And by May 1945, Berlin fell. Hitler was dead. The Nazi Empire collapsed like a house of cards. That's the timeline we know, the one we live in. But it wasn't inevitable. Far from it. What if the weather on D-Day had been just a bit worse, forcing a delay that allowed the Nazis to reinforce the coast? What if the Soviets had been pushed back during the brutal Battle of Stalingrad? What if the Nazis had successfully developed their atomic program first, or even managed to unleash their jet fighters and V-2 rocket arsenal at full scale? What if, in 1943, the assassination plot against Hitler had succeeded, replaced not with democracy, but with even more efficient military command? These are not wild fantasies. Many of these outcomes were razor-thin. In our alternate scenario, we imagine a chilling twist. The Allies fail at Normandy. Britain, exhausted and isolated, sues for peace. The Soviet advance falters and is repelled, and the United States, under domestic pressure and leadership change, never commits fully to the European front. Hitler solidifies his grip on the continent, and then expands. This is the fracture in the timeline, the turning point where history shifts from liberation to domination. From here, we step into the abyss, into a world where the Reich didn't fall. It stood, it grew, it consumed, and now we explore the fragile balance of power that existed before it all could have gone wrong. To understand the terrifying scope of a Nazi victory, we have to grasp what was truly at stake during World War II. This wasn't just a war for territory. It was a war for the future of civilization, for ideas, freedoms, and the very definition of humanity. The Nazi regime wasn't just a military power. It was a fanatical ideology with global ambitions. Hitler's vision, detailed in Mein Kampf and later reinforced through policy, was not merely to dominate Europe, but to reshape the world under a racial hierarchy with Germans at the top, and everyone else classified, enslaved, or exterminated. In the East, Hitler planned what he called Lebensraum, living space. This meant wiping out tens of millions of Slavs, Jews, and other undesirables across the Soviet Union. In their place, German settlers would farm the land, raise families, and create a new Aryan empire. Had the Wehrmacht reached Moscow, this plan would have been put into full effect. It would have meant genocide on a scale even greater than the Holocaust. In Western Europe, countries like France, Belgium, and the Netherlands would have been subjected to permanent occupation, cultural erasure, and economic exploitation. Nazi officials had even devised long-term plans to Germanize certain populations deemed racially acceptable, while eliminating those who weren't. Even the British Isles weren't safe. Operation Sea Lion, the German plan to invade the UK, included mass arrests, executions, and the installation of a puppet government. Key intellectuals and political figures were already listed for elimination. Meanwhile, Nazi ideology had a deep hostility toward modern science, especially what they labeled as Jewish science. Under their rule, Einstein's theories, quantum mechanics, and much of modern physics might have been abandoned or censored. Progress in medicine, space exploration, and technology could have been crippled for decades, and in the US, the implications of a Nazi victory were no less severe. A neutral or defeated America might have turned inward, abandoning its global influence. Roosevelt's vision of a liberal democratic world order embodied in the United Nations would never have materialized. Instead, the world would have fallen under spheres of influence carved out by the Reich, perhaps alongside Imperial Japan. Depending on how long that alliance lasted, democracy would become a relic, dissent a crime, resistance a death sentence. In the real timeline, millions died to prevent that future. But in our alternate timeline, they failed. And now we turn to the moment everything changes. The point where the Nazis don't collapse, but rise even higher. The moment the timeline breaks. History hinges on moments, fleeting, fragile decisions that shape the fate of millions. In our timeline, D-Day was one of those moments. June 6, 1944, the Allied landings in Normandy marked the beginning of the end for the Nazi regime. But in our alternate reality, the beachhead is never secured. A severe Atlantic storm strikes just days before the invasion. Commanders, fearing catastrophe, delay the landings. But the Germans, already suspecting an Allied attack, take the opportunity to reinforce their defenses across northern France. Field Marshal Rommel, previously caught off guard in real history, now has time to mobilize his panzer divisions, set traps, and prepare counteroffensives. When the Allies finally launch their assault, they walk into a slaughter. American, British, and Canadian forces suffer catastrophic losses on the beaches. With no foothold established, Operation Overlord fails. The liberation of Western Europe is aborted. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the Battle of Kursk turns into a Soviet disaster. The Red Army, overextended and fatigued, is outmaneuvered by German armor. With Moscow still recovering from years of war, Stalin's regime begins to fracture. A German push south secures oil fields in the Caucasus, while a new offensive seizes Leningrad. The USSR, bled dry, sues for peace by late 1944. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact is re-established. Only this time, it's unconditional surrender. The United States, facing growing casualties in the Pacific, is politically divided. With no D-Day victory to rally morale, the American public turns against involvement in Europe. In 1945, Roosevelt dies, and isolationist sentiment gains ground. Negotiations begin, not for total victory, but for containment. In this version of events, Hitler does not need to conquer the world outright. He only needs to secure the continent. With Britain isolated and defanged, the United States retreating, and the Soviets defeated, the Nazi regime declares victory. From Paris to Warsaw, from Oslo to Athens, the swastika becomes a symbol, not of terror alone, but of permanence. Resistance cells exist, but they are fractured, hunted, and ultimately crushed. Nazi Germany launches massive propaganda campaigns to rewrite history, glorify its peace, and indoctrinate generations. The Holocaust is hidden, denied, and eventually erased from official memory. Death camps are dismantled or repurposed. Survivors are silenced. The truth is buried under decades of lies. With Europe under iron rule, Hitler begins enacting his long-term vision, the construction of Germania, a monumental capital city designed to dwarf every other civilization that ever existed. Highways, monuments, and Aryan academies replace cathedrals, universities, and ancient culture. This is the moment when the world doesn't wake up. It sleeps under a new empire. Next, we'll see what the immediate post-war years look like under this new global order. A chilling new chapter begins. By 1946, the world breathes differently. Not freely, but carefully, quietly, under the gaze of the Reich. Europe is transformed. The streets of Paris are patrolled by SS officers. The Eiffel Tower stands, but beneath it, propaganda banners flutter beside Nazi insignias. In Rome, the Vatican remains, but only as a relic, its influence reduced to symbolism, its message twisted to align with Aryan doctrine. The Nazi victory triggers the largest forced population movements in human history. Millions of Jews, Slavs, Roma, and political dissidents are either exterminated or relocated to forced labor colonies deep in the conquered Soviet territories. The General Plan Ost, a chilling real-world Nazi blueprint, is put into action. Entire villages disappear. Language, identity, and memory are erased. In Germany, the regime enters a phase of consolidation through civilization. Roads, trains, and communication systems are modernized, not for the benefit of citizens, but for control and ideological distribution. Children grow up in re-education camps, learning a sanitized version of history, racial theory, and blind loyalty to the Führer. Dissent becomes thought crime. The United States, now resigned to a neutral position, withdraws into itself. The 1948 presidential election marks a pivot toward non-interventionist policy. War fatigue, economic strain, and Red Scare paranoia create a society increasingly suspicious of foreign entanglements. The Marshall Plan is never launched. Europe receives no aid. Reconstruction belongs to the Reich. Meanwhile, the Japanese Empire, now unopposed in the East, expands into the Pacific unchallenged. Australia braces for possible invasion. Southeast Asia is absorbed under the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan maintain an uneasy alliance, split by hemispheres but bound by mutual respect for domination. In this new post-war order, art and science become tools of manipulation. The Nazi regime invests heavily in media. Cinema glorifies conquest. Music must align with Aryan values. Modernism, expressionism, jazz, all are banned or tightly controlled. Independent thought is reframed as deviance. But resistance, though, scattered, survives. In the mountains of Spain, among the ruins of Warsaw, and in the forests of Finland, whispers of rebellion remain. Underground networks smuggle books, hide fugitives, and transmit forbidden radio broadcasts. But they are hunted ruthlessly. Surveillance is absolute. Betrayal is common. Hope flickers, but never ignites. By the early 1950s, the idea of liberation is no longer discussed. It is myth. The next generation of Europeans is born into a world where the Reich is not a regime, but reality. Eternal, unchallenged, and shaping the very nature of what it means to be human. Next, we explore how this Nazi victory reshapes the global balance of power and what a divided, oppressed world looks like in the decades that follow. By the mid-1950s, the world has cleaved into two vast authoritarian empires, one draped in red suns, the other in black crosses. The Cold War, as we know it, never happens. There is no ideological standoff between capitalism and communism. Instead, it is a silent global suffocation under totalitarian rule. Nazi Germany rules not only Europe, but vast stretches of North Africa and Western Asia. Its sphere of influence extends into the Middle East, where puppet regimes are installed to secure oil and trade. Any remnants of democratic governments are either dismantled or absorbed into the new fascist world order. A massive wall of censorship divides this world. Borders are rigid. Travel is restricted. Information is controlled. Western languages like French, Dutch, and Polish are slowly replaced by standardized High German. School books are rewritten. Entire histories are erased. The Holocaust, the resistance, the democratic uprisings, all vanish from official records. A pan-European Reich identity is enforced, built on racial purity, submission, and military discipline. Meanwhile, Imperial Japan consolidates its control over East and Southeast Asia. Korea is annexed. China is partitioned into client states. The Philippines, Indonesia, and Indochina become colonies in everything but name. The Japanese Empire mirrors the Reich in brutality, but adds its own cultural assimilation, forced labor, and biological experimentation. The United States, geographically isolated but no longer morally superior, shifts its focus inward. The civil rights movement never gains momentum. Anti-Semitism and racism, unchecked by the horrors of Nazi revelation, simmer just beneath the surface. America becomes a cautious observer, a sleeping giant that refuses to wake. Latin America, Africa, and much of the Middle East are carved into zones of influence. Dictatorships emerge, backed by either Berlin or Tokyo. Neutral nations, Switzerland, Sweden, Argentina, walk a tightrope of silence and strategic cooperation, trading ethics for survival. The global economy is transformed into a militarized, centralized system. German corporations dominate global manufacturing, tied directly to state power. Japanese conglomerates mirror this in the East. Innovation slows. Technology serves the regime, not the people. And the United Nations? It never exists. There is no universal declaration of human rights, no international court, no Geneva Conventions to hold anyone accountable. The world's great crimes go unpunished because they are no longer considered crimes. In this new geopolitical order, fear replaces diplomacy. Empires don't negotiate, they dictate. The idea of a free world is a forbidden dream. The Iron Curtain isn't metaphorical, it's physical, ideological, and impenetrable. As we move into the 1970s and beyond in this alternate reality, culture, science, and belief itself are reshaped by force. What happens to the soul of humanity under a regime that rewrites the meaning of truth? By the 1970s, culture is no longer a matter of creativity. It's a matter of control. In the Greater Germanic Reich, art exists only as a vessel for ideology. All forms of expression are filtered through the lens of Aryan supremacy. There are no novels that challenge the state, no films that question morality, no music born from rebellion. Jazz, blues, and rock never take root, banned as degenerate and extinguished before they could inspire a generation. The faces of public life are uniform, white, genetically screened, state-approved. Diversity vanishes from the public sphere. Languages like Yiddish, Polish, and Czech are outlawed. Even religion is reshaped. Christianity is co-opted, stripped of its Jewish origins, and rebranded into a cold, authoritarian, positive Christianity that glorifies obedience and militarism. The scientific world is equally strangled. Without the influx of Jewish, Slavic, and dissident scientists, many of whom, in our timeline, fled Europe to power the American scientific revolution, innovation slows. Albert Einstein's theories are denounced. Quantum mechanics is considered subversive. The space race? It never happens. The moon remains untouched, as both Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan see little value in ventures beyond Earth. Instead, technology is focused inward, on surveillance, control, and eugenics. Genetic screening becomes institutionalized. Children are monitored from birth, ranked by racial fitness. Those who fall short are sterilized, institutionalized, or worse. Medical research focuses not on curing disease, but on purifying the population. Mental illness is criminalized. Disability is grounds for elimination. Philosophy is purged. Nietzsche is twisted into a state mouthpiece. Kant, Hegel, and Marx are banned. In universities, now renamed Institutes of Racial Excellence. Free inquiry is replaced by state indoctrination. There are no debates, no dissenting lectures, no underground bookstores. Even libraries are sanitized, their shelves lined with volumes bearing titles like The Eternal Aryan or The Myth of Democracy. In the Japanese Empire, similar patterns emerge. Shintoism is elevated as the state religion, fused with emperor worship. Buddhism is tolerated only when neutered of its spiritual autonomy. Any Western influence is scrubbed. Schools teach imperial virtue, racial hierarchy, and the divine right of conquest. The arts are nationalistic. Censorship is total. But beneath the surface, resistance lives. In secret poetry, in pirated books, in whispered songs shared in underground clubs. Even under totalitarianism, the human spirit finds cracks to breathe through. Still, the damage is deep. After 3 generations, the idea of freedom is foreign to most. No internet, no global conversation, no free press. The world becomes a mosaic of fear, submission, and silence. As we step into the modern era, 2025 in this alternate world, the consequences become impossible to ignore. A question looms. Who are we when we've never been allowed to ask? It's 2025, but not our 2025. In this timeline, the swastika still flies, not just over Europe, but embedded into the very infrastructure of life. Berlin, now called Germania, is the administrative center of the world. A cold, symmetrical city of granite, iron, and statues glorifying conquest. No graffiti, no protest, no elections. Children are raised in government nurseries. Parents report on one another. People smile, but only when watched. Digital IDs track movement. Facial recognition monitors emotion. A single unsanctioned book can result in disappearance. The Holocaust, denied. History is a controlled narrative, and the past, as Orwell warned, is whatever the state says it is. There is no Google, no Wikipedia, no TikTok. The internet exists, but only within each Reich-approved region. Communication is monitored, encrypted by default, but not to protect privacy, to ensure compliance. Algorithms detect dissent before it's spoken. The concept of cancel culture is literal. People are erased. In the Japanese-controlled East, the cities are quiet. Too quiet. Cultural identity has dissolved into obedience. Mandarin, Korean, Tagalog all replaced by state languages. Traditional festivals exist, but only as performative displays approved by the Emperor's Ministry of Harmony. And the United States? Still independent, but broken. It never became the superpower we know. It never landed on the moon. Its economy remains strong, but inward. Its people, fragmented. The idea of global leadership, of promoting human rights, was surrendered 80 years ago. Now America's just another spectator. But here's the deepest tragedy of this timeline. Most people in it don't know they're not free. They don't know what art could be, what love without fear feels like, what it means to walk down a street and question. They live in a world without memory and therefore without resistance. This is the power of alternate history. It doesn't just ask, what if? It reminds us that nothing we have was guaranteed. Democracy, expression, even truth itself, all of it is fragile. All of it had to be fought for, and it can all still be lost. So what do we do with this knowledge? We remember, we challenge, we protect the reality we do live in, flawed, imperfect, but free. Because history is not just a record of the past, it's a warning for the future. If you found this story compelling, informative, or chilling, subscribe to our channel. We explore the roads not taken to better understand the one we're on. Share this video. Start the conversation, because freedom begins with thought, and thought begins here.